Information Vacuum. The Art of Mirror Silence. Chapter 1. The Clash Phase. The meeting room of Argus Group smelled of expensive leather, ozone from the functioning air purifiers, and the faint, metallic scent of someone else's adrenaline. Victor sat in his chair, feeling the hum of the air conditioner vibrating somewhere at the base of his skull. Opposite him was Markov, the man who had just elegantly framed Victor for an internal audit. Victor, we all understand that the reporting for the Lion branch is, shall we say, a creative work. Markov smiled, without engaging the muscles around his eyes. A true Duchenne smile requires sincerity. Here, there was only a mechanical stretching of the lips. You do realize that the board of directors is waiting for explanations. Markov fell silent, tilting his head by 15 degrees. This is a classic gesture of waiting for excuses. He expected Victor to start fussing, to fill the emerging void with words, to justify himself, thereby giving away fragments of real information that could be seized upon. Victor felt panic beginning to boil in his chest, an ancient reaction of the amygdala to the threat of expulsion from the tribe. His brain was screaming, "Say something, defend yourself." Victor waited. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds. He did not look into Markov's eyes, but at the point between his eyebrows, just above the bridge of the nose. This creates a sense of pressure in the interlocutor, depriving them of the comfort of eye-to-eye visual contact. Explanations of what exactly, Arkady Borisovich? Victor's voice was flat, devoid of intonational spikes. Markov blinked slightly more often than usual, his pupils constricted. He did not receive the expected flow of words. The vacuum began to suck him in. He moved a glass of water 2 centimeters to the left, the first sign of micro-stress and an attempt to regain control over the space. Phase. Psychological X-ray. What happened here? Markov used cognitive suppression. He asked an open-ended, accusatory question, creating a guilty-by-default situation. At that moment, the mechanism of apophenia is activated in an average person. The brain begins to connect unrelated facts in an attempt to find a justification, thereby giving away strategic secrets. Biologically, Victor faced an attack on his hierarchical position. The adrenal glands began to inject cortisol. His freeze reaction could have turned into flight, fussy speech. However, he chose a conscious information vacuum. From a Jungian perspective, Victor met Markov's shadow. Arkady's shadow is his own readiness for betrayal, which he projects onto Victor. Victor's silence destroyed this projection. When you remain silent, the manipulator begins to see not a victim in you, but their own reflection. They are overcome by projective identification. They begin to fear that you know more about them than you are saying. Phase. Counter-strike lesson. Number 1. Never be the first to fill the silence. The one who speaks more surrenders their position. In any confrontation, silence is a mirror. If you remain silent in response to aggression or hidden accusation, the opponent begins to project their own fears into that void. Strategy. Count to 5 to yourself after any question that requires a justification. Result. The manipulator will begin to finish the thought for you, revealing their true intentions or the weak points in their narrative. Phase. Sensory immersion outside the window. The sky was the color of unpolished aluminum. The massive glass panels of the office absorbed the light, giving nothing back. The city below seemed like a microcircuit where millions of human pixels rushed in Brownian motion, unaware that their roots were traced by algorithms of consumption and fear. It was too cold in the office. Cold is the best ally of clarity. It constricts the blood vessels, preventing blood from rushing to the face and revealing your confusion with a characteristic flush. Chapter 2. False vulnerability. The wounded beast trap phase. The clash. An evening at the exclusive club Monolith resembled a terrarium. There were no friends here, only temporary alliances. Victor sat at the bar with Elena, the head of the legal department, who, as he knew, was leaking information to Markov. Victor looked depressed. He slumped slightly. His fingers tapped nervously on the stem of the glass. He allowed his shoulders to drop, demonstrating a submissive posture. I do not know, Lena. It seems I overestimated my strength in this project. Victor lowered his voice to a confidential whisper. Markov is right. I may have made a mistake in the tax calculations. Now I just do not know how to get out of this mess. I have even stopped sleeping. Elena leaned forward. Her pupils dilated. The dopamine loop was closed. She smelled blood. She believed that Victor was broken and was seeking protection from her. Now, Vitya. Everyone makes mistakes. Her voice became soft, almost maternal. Tell me more. Where exactly is the error? I will see what can be done through my people in the audit. She touched his forearm. This was a gesture of dominance, disguised as support. Victor felt the dryness of her palm. She was already mentally selling this information to Markov. There, in the Transit 2025 folder. Victor faltered, as if it were difficult for him to speak. There are files that I did not have time to encrypt. If the auditors see them, it is over for me. Phase, psychological X-ray. Victor applied false vulnerability. He used the halo effect in reverse. By creating the image of a loser, he caused Elena to lose her vigilance. Biologically, Elena's predatory instinct was triggered at the sight of wounded prey. At that moment, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical analysis, shuts down, giving way to excitement. She stopped verifying Victor because his weakness confirmed her superiority. From a psychological standpoint, Victor used his persona, mask, of a victim to hide the shadow of a hunter. Jung warned, "The persona is that which a person in reality is not, but which they and others take them for." Victor presented Elena with a fake persona. The files in the Transit 2025 folder were a trap. They contained data that, when opened, left a digital footprint proving Elena's own unauthorized access to confidential information. Phase, Counter-Strike Lesson Number 2. Show the enemy your mortal wound, and they will forget to protect their own neck. Manipulators are always looking for a weak spot. If you do not show it to them, they will search for it long and hard. Give them what they want to find. Create a controlled leak of weakness. Strategy. Confess to a sin that actually does not matter or is a trap. Result. The aggressor concentrates all their forces on a false target, becoming vulnerable to your real strike. Phase, sensory immersion. The air in the club was heavy with the scents of expensive perfume and cigar smoke, which layered under the ceiling like fog over a swamp. The light was dimmed and amber, turning the faces of those present into the frozen masks of an ancient theater. In the corner, a saxophone played. A slow, melancholic melody emphasized the atmosphere of false comfort. Victor felt the cold surface of the bar counter, artificial stone imitating marble. It was just as cold and fake as the sympathy in Elena's eyes. Chapter 3. Destruction of reality. gaslighting against the manipulator phase. The clash. The next morning, Markov summoned Victor to his office. The folder in question lay on the table. Victor, I have reviewed your Transit 2025 files. You lied to me. There are no calculation errors there. There is... Markov frowned. There is a void. Just bad sectors. Victor looked at him with sincere, deep confusion. He raised his eyebrows, creating wrinkles on his forehead, a classic sign of surprise. Arkady Borisovich, what folder? I spent the entire evening yesterday at home. I had a migraine. I did not log into the system, and I certainly did not say anything to you. Markov froze. He looked at the printout of the logs that Elena had given him. I was told you confessed to Elena in the bar. Victor let out a short, dry laugh. In the bar? Arkady Borisovich, I do not drink with colleagues, and I have not been to Monolith for 6 months. Are you sure Elena is quite all right? Lately, she seems very overexcited. Perhaps she should take a rest. Victor spoke softly, with a slight touch of sympathy. He did not argue. He simply offered another version of reality in which Markov was the victim of someone else's fantasies. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is radical pragmatism. Victor used cognitive dissonance. When a person is presented with two contradictory facts, the words of a trusted person versus the convincing calmness of the victim, the brain chooses the safest path. Victor attacked the authority of the source, Elena, without attacking Markov himself. This forced Markov to doubt not Victor, but his own ability to perceive information adequately. Biologically, Markov felt disorientation. In a state of stress, the hippocampus, responsible for memory, can malfunction. Victor took advantage of this to sow the seed of doubt. Jung called this a meeting with the anima, the irrational, emotional side of the psyche, which in people like Markov is usually suppressed. By introducing an irrational element, Elena is delusional. Victor forced the logical Markov out of his comfort zone. Phase. Counter-strike lesson. Number 3. The one who defines reality owns the situation. Deny the obvious with absolute calmness. Truth is a matter of consensus. If you are convincing enough in your denial and offer a logical, though false, alternative, you destroy the psychological foundation of the opponent. Strategy. Never confess, even if you are caught red-handed. Shift the focus to the mental state of the witness or the absurdity of the situation. Result: the opponent begins to spend resources on verifying reality rather than attacking you. Phase. Sensory immersion. Outside the window, fine, stinging snow began to fall. It melted as soon as it touched the glass, leaving dirty streaks that looked like tears. In the office, a clock was ticking. The heavy Rolex on Markov's wrist counted down the seconds with the ruthlessness of a guillotine. Victor watched a dust mote dancing in a beam of light that had broken through the blinds. The world around was fragile, assembled from words and perceptions, and he had just cut one of the threads holding this world in balance. Chapter 4. Psychological Triangulation. The art of managing the conflicts of others. Phase. The clash after the incident with the folder. A heavy, thundery silence reigned in the Argus Group office. Victor understood. To finally neutralize Elena, he did not need to strike her himself. He needed to make Markov do it for him. Victor met Elena by the coffee machine. He did not avoid her. On the contrary, he approached closely, violating her proxemics, the personal comfort zone of about 45 centimeters. Elena instinctively recoiled. Her shoulder jerked, a micro sign of readiness for flight or attack. Lena. Victor lowered his voice, making it soft, almost sympathetic. Markov asked me about your accounts yesterday, the ones through which the trenches for the Lion project passed. I told him that it was most likely an error in the documentation, but he was very angry. It seems he is looking for a scapegoat. Victor noticed Elena's nostrils flare. This is a sign of sympathetic nervous system activation, an influx of oxygen for a burst of action. She did not know that Markov had asked nothing, but she knew that the accounts existed. He could not have, she whispered. Her voice broke on a high note. I just wanted to warn you. Be careful. He said that trust is a resource that Elena has exhausted. Victor turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. He left her in a state of cognitive impasse. Phase: psychological X-ray. Victor applied triangulation, the creation of a destructive triangle where he acts as the rescuer, Markov as the aggressor, and Elena as the victim. Biologically, Elena entered a state of hypervigilance. A storm began in her brain. The amygdala was sending signals of danger, while the prefrontal cortex was trying to find logic where there was none. She would now interpret any action by Markov, even a random glance, as confirmation of Victor's words. From the point of view of Carl Jung, Victor activated the archetype of the betrayed in Elena. When a person feels a threat from the one they served, Markov, they immediately transition to the stage of shadow betrayal. They are ready to strike first to survive. Victor did not create the conflict. He simply illuminated the suspicions already existing in the shadow. Phase: counterstrike lesson. Number 4. To destroy two enemies, make them believe they are already destroying each other. Never engage in direct conflict if you can create conditions under which your opponents will tear each other's throats out. Your silent presence as a friend to both sides gives you access to information from both sides. Strategy: pass on distorted information viruses, that confirms the worst fears of each side. Result: the enemies exhaust their resources in an internecine war, leaving you as the sole survivor on the ashes. Phase: sensory immersion. In the corridor, there was a smell of overheated printer plastic and sterility. The light of the fluorescent lamps flickered unpleasantly at a frequency that causes slight nausea in those who spend more than 8 hours there. This is office deprivation. It makes the psyche of people soft and malleable. Elena stood by the window, and her silhouette against the gray sky seemed brittle, like a dry branch. Victor felt the taste of victory. It was metallic, like the taste of blood on the tongue after a long run. Chapter 5. The halo effect and cognitive blinding phase. The clash. 2 days later, Victor organized a meeting with the key shareholders. He knew that Markov would try to discredit him personally. But Victor prepared differently. He changed his style. Instead of his usual business suit, he wore a flawless, bespoke piece. Instead of glasses, he wore contact lenses that made his gaze harder and more direct. When he entered the room, he did not sit down immediately. He walked around the perimeter, touching the backs of the chairs. This is a gesture of marking territory, characteristic of higher primates. Colleagues, before Markov presents his claims, Victor emphasized the word with a light, ironic intonation. I want you to look at this chart. These are not profit figures. This is a chart of the depletion of our trust in old management methods. Markov tried to interrupt, but Victor raised his palm, vertically, fingers together. This is a stop signal that is perceived at a subconscious level as the command of a leader. Arkady, your time will come. Right now, the numbers are speaking. Victor used a voice in a low register. Low frequencies in men are associated with high testosterone levels and physical strength. The shareholders, most of whom were people over 50, instinctively began to listen to him with greater attention. Phase: psychological X-ray. Here, the halo effect was at work. If a person looks like a leader, speaks like a leader, and acts like a leader, our brain automatically attributes competencies to them that they may not actually possess. Victor used a dopamine trap. He promised something new, safe, and progressive, which causes listeners to have a dopamine release in anticipation of a reward. In this state, critical thinking, associated with cortisol and the anxiety that Markov tried to provoke, is suppressed. From a Jungian perspective, Victor took on the archetype of the wise old man or the hero, contrasting it with Markov, who in the eyes of the board of directors began to turn into the archetype of the senile king clinging to power. Phase: Counter-Strike lesson. Number 5. Your image is a weapon. If you look like power, you will be forgiven for a lack of arguments. People do not listen to the meaning of words. They read status. If your status in the eyes of the group is higher than that of your opponent, any lie of yours will be perceived as a complex strategic decision, while any truth of the opponent will be seen as a pathetic excuse. Strategy: invest in nonverbal markers of status: posture, tone of voice, clothing, the ability to occupy space. Result: the opponent is forced to attack not your ideas, but your ideality, which from the outside looks like envy or hysteria. Phase: sensory immersion. Outside the window, a cold rain rustled, breaking against the panoramic windows with the sound of scattering beads. It was warm in the hall, smelling of freshly ground coffee and ambition. Victor felt his confidence filling the space, displacing the oxygen. He saw Markov squeezing his pen. His knuckles had turned white. This was a gesture of powerlessness. The predator sensed that the forest no longer belonged to him. Chapter 6: Projection Inversion. How to make the enemy confess. Phase: the clash. The final round. Markov's office after the meeting. Markov is crushed, but he still has access to archives that could bury Victor. Victor entered without knocking. He sat opposite Markov, leaning back in the chair in a relaxed manner. "Arkady, I know why you tried so hard to remove me," Victor said quietly. "You see yourself in me from 20 years ago. Just as ambitious, just as ruthless. And you are afraid that I will make the same mistake you made with that contract in Singapore." Markov jerked his head up. Only 2 people knew about the contract in Singapore, and one of them was dead. "You. How did you?" Markov faltered. His face became the color of earth. "Your shadow always follows you, Arkady. You are projecting your old sins onto me, trying to fix the past by destroying my future. No, it will not work, because I am not you. I know my weaknesses, and you hide yours even from yourself." Phase: psychological X-ray. Victor applied projection inversion. According to Jung, everything that irritates us and others is our own repressed traits. Victor forced Markov to face his own shadow face to face. On a biological level, this caused an amygdala hijack in Markov. The memory of an old crime, Singapore, triggered an immediate release of norepinephrine. The system of logic collapsed. At such a moment, a person is most vulnerable to suggestion or blackmail. Victor used cold reading. He did not know the details of Singapore. He had merely found a mention of an old audit in the archives and reconstructed the picture using Markov's psychological profile. Phase. Counterstrike lesson number 6. Find in a person what they hate most in themselves and call it by name. Everyone has a skeleton in the closet that they mistake for their own spine. As soon as you name the hidden fear or old sin of an opponent, you gain a mystical power over them. They begin to believe that you see right through them. Strategy. Study the enemy's past, not for the sake of facts, but for the sake of patterns. People always repeat their mistakes. Result: the enemy is paralyzed by the fear of exposure and is ready for any conditions, provided you preserve their clean persona. Chapter 7. The emotional anchor. Programming the reactions of others. Phase. The clash. Markov was broken, but still dangerous. Like a wounded bear, he could make one last, fatal lunge. Victor needed not just to defeat him, but to develop in him a conditioned reflex of fear at his mere appearance. To do this, Victor used anchoring. Over the past 3 months, every time Markov faced a failure, be it a failed contract or a reprimand from shareholders, Victor was nearby and did the same thing. He slowly adjusted the cufflink on his left wrist and took a deep, emphasized breath through his nose. At the final meeting, when the question of removing Markov from his position was being decided, Victor sat opposite him. Markov began his defense speech. His voice trembled, but he tried to make arguments. Victor waited for a pause, looked Markov straight in the eye, and slowly adjusted the cufflink on his left wrist, taking that same breath. Markov faltered. His brain, which had recorded this gesture in moments of past humiliation, immediately reproduced the chemical cocktail of defeat. He forgot his argument. His face became covered in red spots. He looked like a man who had already lost, even before the vote. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is classic neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, based on the biology of Pavlovian reflexes. Markov's brain formed a neural connection between Victor's gesture and the state of cortisol stress. Biologically, this works through the hippocampus and the amygdala. When Victor reproduced the anchor, Markov's amygdala sent a signal of an imminent threat, blocking the prefrontal cortex responsible for logical speech and planning. Jung called this working with complexes. A complex is a group of psychic contents charged with a certain affect. Victor created a defeat complex in Markov, tying it to an external stimulus. Now Victor manages Markov's state without even saying a word. Phase. Counterstrike lesson number 7. Manage the enemy's reflexes. Create an association between yourself and their greatest fears. You do not need to convince a person of their weakness every time. It is enough to reliably link your specific gesture, scent, or phrase with their moment of deepest shame or fear once. Strategy. Choose a unique but natural gesture. Repeat it every time the opponent suffers a failure in your presence. Result: at the decisive moment, it will be enough for you to simply reproduce this gesture to collapse their self-confidence. Phase. Sensory immersion. In the hall, there was a smell of ozone and old parchment, a scent that always accompanied board meetings. The light was cold, directed from above, turning the shadows under the eyes of those present into deep hollows. Victor felt the weight of his watch on his wrist. It seemed like shackles he had voluntarily put on to remember the discipline of time. Markov, however, looked limp, like an empty suit from which the person had been removed. Chapter 8. The paradox of choice, the lesser of two evils. trap phase. The clash. When the vote ended not in Markov's favor, Victor offered him a private conversation in a small office. Arkady, you have two paths. Victor placed 2 sheets of paper on the table. First, you leave under an article for incompetence. We initiate a full investigation into Singapore, and your career ends in court. Second, you sign a voluntary resignation for health reasons. You receive a golden parachute, but you hand over to me all your access codes to the archives and personal contacts in Lyon. Markov looked at the papers. He felt that he had been backed into a corner. But in reality, Victor was offering him an illusion of choice. Both options led to Victor's total victory. I give you 3 minutes. Victor stood up and went to the window. Either disgrace in prison or quiet departure with money, but total capitulation before me. Phase, psychological X-ray. This is the strategy of the double bind. The brain of a person in a state of stress seeks the least evil. By offering 2 negative options, one of which seems slightly less painful, you distract the victim's attention from a third option, fighting or seeking alternatives. Biologically, the framing effect is involved here. The frame of the discussion is narrowed down to 2 points. Markov does not have the resource to go beyond this frame, as his cognitive functions are exhausted by previous attacks. From a Jungian perspective, Victor uses Markov's shadow against him. Markov's desire to save face, persona, and money forces him to choose the second option. Victor bought his loyalty for his own fears. Phase, Counter-Strike lesson number 8. Never give the enemy a choice. Give them the illusion of choosing between your plan A and your plan B. People value free will. Let them feel that they have made the decision themselves by choosing from the options you proposed. This will deprive them of the desire to resist the consequences, because they decided so themselves. Strategy. Formulate 2 proposals such that either of them fully satisfies your interests. Make one of them intentionally more frightening. Result: the opponent will choose the better for them proposal and will feel relief, effectively surrendering into your captivity. Chapter 9. Radical Deconstruction of Authority. The king is naked. Phase, the clash. Elena, who was still trying to play on Markov's side, burst into the office. Victor, this is illegal. I will mobilize all legal connections. I will destroy your reputation, she shouted, trying to regain her status as a dominant player. Victor did not even turn his head. He continued to look out the window. Lena, look at your hands, he said calmly. She froze, involuntarily looking at her palms. They are trembling. Do you know why? Because your authority is merely a reflection of Markov's power, and Markov is no more. You are not shouting at me right now. You are shouting at the void he left behind. You are no longer the head of the legal department. You are a woman in an expensive suit who has just lost everything because she bet on a lame horse. Elena faltered. Her scream turned into a pathetic sob. Victor deconstructed her social role, leaving her alone with her defenselessness. Phase, psychological X-ray. Victor applied the deconstruction of the persona. He stripped Elena of her social mask, forcing her to realize that her strength was borrowed. Biologically, this caused her to experience social alienation, one of the most painful states for the human brain, comparable to physical pain. When the hierarchical structure collapses, those who were on its steps lose their orientation in space and time. Jung called this the inflation of the ego. Elena identified herself with her position. When the position vanished, her ego collapsed. Victor simply pointed out this fact, depriving her of her last psychological defense. Phase. Counter-strike lesson number 9. Do not attack the person. Attack their role. Once the role is destroyed, the person becomes nobody. The power of most people rests on their positions, titles, or connections. If you show them, and others, that these attributes no longer matter, their strength will evaporate in an instant. Strategy. In moments of aggression from superiors or authorities, point out their human weaknesses and the temporary nature of their status. Result: you seize the initiative, turning a formidable opponent into a bewildered commoner. Chapter 10. Integration of the shadow. The end of the game phase. The clash. Victor stood in Markov's empty office. Everything was finished. Markov had signed the papers. Elena had resigned. He had obtained what he had been aiming for, absolute control over Argus Group. He looked in the mirror, but he did not see a hero there. He saw a man who had learned to lie, to manipulate, and to destroy lives with surgical precision. For a moment, he felt afraid. An old morality, a sense of guilt, stirred within him. But Victor closed his eyes and took a breath. He remembered Jung's words. I would rather be whole than good. He did not suppress his shadow. He did not try to justify himself. He simply accepted the fact that a predator lives within him, and it was this predator that saved him from destruction. He stopped fighting himself. The conflict disappeared. A frozen, absolute silence ensued. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This is individuation, the highest goal according to Jung. Victor integrated his shadow. He stopped dividing himself into the good Victor and the bad manipulator. He became a unified whole. Biologically, this means a reduction in the level of chronic stress. When there is no internal conflict, the brain works with maximum efficiency. The prefrontal cortex and the limbic system work in synergy rather than in opposition. Victor understood the fundamental law of ethology. In nature, it is not the kindest who survives, but the most adapted. His adaptation became psychological vigilance and a readiness to accept his dark side. Phase. Counter-strike lesson number 10. Your shadow is not an enemy. It is your most loyal bodyguard. Accept it, and you will become invulnerable. The world will try to make you convenient, understandable, and kind. This is a trap for the weak. Real power begins where self-deception ends. Strategy. Stop justifying your tough decisions with morality. Acknowledge your thirst for power and your calculation. Result. When you accept your shadow, others can no longer use it against you. You become the one who reads others while remaining an impenetrable black mirror for them. Phase. Sensory immersion. Night descended upon the city, turning it into an ocean of lights. Victor stood at the top of the skyscraper, separated from the abyss by only a thin layer of glass. He felt the rhythm of his heart, calm, at 60 beats per minute. Below, in the darkness, millions of people continued to play their games, unaware that the rules had already changed. He was alone, but he was no longer lonely. He had found himself in the very center of his own darkness. And that darkness was beautiful. The anatomy of total superiority. Victor's story is not the path of a hero in the classical sense. It is a chronicle of a biological mutation of consciousness. We have traced how a person in the position of a potential victim, prey, consistently hacked social codes and transformed into a peak predator, operator. Everything that happened within the walls of Argus Group is merely a miniature model of global processes. The world is not a collection of personalities. It is a clash of projections, fears, and dominant patterns. Final synthesis of the strategy. Summarizing this psychological investigation, we see three fundamental stages of transformation. 1. Deconstruction of illusions. Victor stopped believing in what people say and began looking at how they broadcast their biological signals, micro-expressions, proxemics, reflexes. He realized that morality is a psychological fuse, that the weak install for the strong. 2. Instrumentalization of the shadow. Using Jungian methods, he stopped suppressing his aggression and thirst for power. Instead, he turned them into tools. Silence became a vacuum, sucking out information. Lies became a tool for defining reality. Weakness became bait in a trap. 3. Hierarchical victory. By replacing emotional reactions, fear, shame, guilt, with strategic calculations, cortisol monitoring, dopamine anchoring, he seized control of the group. He did not simply remove enemies. He forced them to self-annihilate by using their own psychic defects. Final diagnosis. You have received a manual for the psychological dissection of reality. Now you know. To read people means to see their shadow before they have time to put on their persona. But this vigilance has a price. Victor became invulnerable because he ceased to be predictable. However, he also ceased to be one of their own for any human community. The one who sees the mechanisms governing the crowd can no longer be part of the crowd. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakes. But remember, having woken up in a world of sleepers, you will find that you no longer have anything to talk to them about. You will merely observe their convulsive attempts to seem good, while you methodically take what belongs to you by the right of the strong.